Hello, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt. Welcome to AppTV's Religion and Life. This week we explore religion's attitude and response towards same-sex marriage. Our guests are Shirley Harris, ruling elder of the Presbyterian Church USA, and Dr. Davis Hankins of App State's Philosophy and Religion Department. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
As you know, the recent Supreme Court decision has now legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states. And in the wake of that decision, many conservative religious groups have expressed fear over attacks on religious liberty or expressed dissent in some way, while other groups have celebrated the decision. Regardless, religious groups, churches, synagogues, etc., are going to have to deal with how the church, how the congregation, and how the clergy will respond when a same-sex couple wants to seek marriage. Now, Shirley, I know that your tradition, the Presbyterian Church USA, had attempted to be and has been proactive on this issue even before the Supreme Court decision. Could you tell us a little bit about what your tradition has done to face the issue of same-sex marriage, both at the national level and then maybe how that's trickled down to local levels?
Sure. A year ago, in June of 2014, at the national meetings called General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA, they voted to approve same-sex marriage, but give the latitude that a clergyman or session may decide not to. So we can get into a bit of that later. But that is a full year ahead of the Supreme Court.
And in voting to approve or to sanction same-sex marriage, there were some changes, I think, to bylaws or constitutions or so forth. Was there a wording change that then expanded the definition of marriage at the kind of basic level? Or
Yes. There is the Book of Order in which all of the church polity is mapped out and all of that. And the wording was changed so that it did no longer read marriage between a man and a woman, although that is tradition, but between couples also of same sex.
Okay, so at the national level then, there is a sanctioning of traditional marriage and same-sex marriage, but there's not the attempt to force.
That's true. In the Presbyterian Church.
In the Presbyterian Church.
That's true.
At the local level. Now, both of you, I think, are members of a local Presbyterian church, and recently you attempted to address this issue at the local level, piggybacking, I guess, on the national decisions. And Davis, I think you participated here in a extended seminar at your local church. I guess a kind of educational symposium, right, to deal with these issues at a local level. Could you describe a little bit of what you did there, both you individually and the larger context of what was going on at that church?
Yeah, and I will say also with the Presbyterian Church, in relation to what Shirley was saying, that the church has been dealing with this issue and writing position statements for decades now. And in large part, I think the massive shift in tide in the United States on this issue, churches are often positioned as antagonistic toward the issue, but churches have done a lot, I believe, to prepare the nation to take a different stance on this issue, and the Presbyterian Church is just one small part of that. But
so, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to get this point, make sure I understand what you're saying. There has been a shift in popular opinion over the last few years, and I think I heard you say that actually the work that churches and other religious organizations have been doing has helped to shift that opinion or help that opinion to change at the popular level. Is that correct?
Right, I think so. And this decision from the Presbyterian Church is one that we had voted on before, and papers had been written for congregations from the national governing body and for decades now. But in terms of the local church, and here in the high country in Blowing Rock, where the Rumpel Presbyterian Church is, which is a Presbyterian PCUSA church, and yet many, and as is true I think of many congregations, many folks in the pews are not intimately familiar with the polity of the larger organization, and as well as issues around biblical interpretation and the history of the the church in the particular institution. So we had this 7-night education. What was it called? Enrichment. Enrichment.
Enrichment
But it was adult education, and we took over the course of 7 nights these major topics, some of which were not directly relevant to the issue, like what is the polity of the Presbyterian Church? How does the Presbyterian Church USA make decisions such as this? And what is the Reformed traditions, history of engaging and interpreting the biblical text? And then there were also sessions directly relevant to what has the Presbyterian Church decided exactly, and how is it related to the Bible and other sources of authority for the church. And I participated in one of those nights, and Shirley did as well.
And Shirley, you participated as well. Did you help organize the symposium, or organize and
No, I was a
participate?
presenter one night. Davis was a presenter one night on different topics that were being addressed. I think we need to recognize that these are not easy decisions, and not everyone agrees at the outset. So we've had to struggle through, as a congregation, the response to this, even though the church in a national setting makes a decision. Individual congregations have to wrestle with this. And that's the part that prompted 7 weeks, Sunday nights, of trying to come together on what this is and how this congregation will move forward. And that's huge.
Well, that's what interests me about what's been going on locally, because I believe this is an effort that was ground roots, really, grassroots, that you designed locally. This is not something that came from the national board, but you decided this was a way to deal with this in the local congregation. And of course, the polity of the Presbyterian Church is going to be different from other religious traditions.
Absolutely.
Even though you have the national stance now in the Presbyterian Church, the Presbyterian Church at the national level is not forcing this on local sessions or local congregations, which may present some interesting controversies if you have a session out of line with the national church, or a local church that has differing opinions within the church. So even though this kind of a broad and expansive take on this position, it might create other.
Well, I think as we wrestle with this, Ozzie, that one of the beauties for me as a Presbyterian PCUSA person is that our church has said, a session may say, we're really not comfortable doing that. A clergyman may say, I'm not comfortable doing that. On the other hand, a session may say, I am comfortable. A clergy may say, I'm not, or they may differ. But within our church, it is, we may not bind a conscience. So when I voted, I was to vote my conscience. When a clergy performs weddings or does not, exercising his or her conscience. And the session, the same thing, so that we can see change over time. And I think in the early stages for me of these huge social changes, that's kind of a nice meeting ground, for lack of a better term.
And it allows for change and evolution, as you said.
Yeah. And the church, another part of the decision that the Presbyterian Church made was that not only to redefine marriage as no longer between a man and a woman, but instead between two people. They also made it such that any clergy person who performs a same-sex marriage cannot be cannot be brought up for censure or some kind of discipline, which had been the case in the past. So clergy are free, even if their own local church body decides not to allow same-sex marriages on the church premises, which is possible. That same clergy person, if they are willing to perform same-sex marriages, may do so elsewhere. And and then they may not as well, as Shirley said.
Well, it strikes me too that the way that you all at the local level went about this could actually be used as a kind of template or a model that other denominations within the Christian tradition or other religious groups outside of that tradition could adapt and use as a way of coming to maybe not consensus, but understanding on this issue and even other theological issues.
Right, I think so, and it was remarkable the extent to which folks were not aware of their own tradition, the tradition in which they are a member, and yet they may have become a member at this church after a lifetime at another church or no church at all, and so the amount of religious, I guess, illiteracy about their own tradition was palpable at these sessions, I think, where even the basic polity and issues involving the Bible and its use in the church were new to folks, and I think that religious illiteracy I don't do surveys, but it must be on the rise, and I think certainly such a session, whether it focuses on this issue, which I think, as Shirley said, many churches will have to be dealing with this, or others, the kind of religious education that happened at Rumpel certainly many churches would, or non-churches, synagogues or whatever, would benefit from that kind of education.
I think you can easily understand, Ozzie, that churches have easily split over these kinds of issues, and this one is not unlike that. And so rather than in an effort to try to maintain the congregation, this is one of those efforts in which we study, recognizing that there are different interpretations of Scripture, there are different sides of issues and all of that. And within the Presbyterian Church, we have a term called mutual forbearance. And that was really, certainly, our hope is that after we go through 7 weeks of study and reflection, we don't imagine or pretend that we're going to all suddenly agree, but that we will somehow achieve mutual forbearance. And that's really important, that we show a kindness to one another and our differences.
And I think this certainly is an issue that many have left the Presbyterian Church over, and many congregations will leave over too, just as when the decision was made to ordain women, it was very divisive and splinter. Presbyterian congregations, denominations were formed, and the same is happening now. But also I think the church will be appealing to certain folks in their communities in ways that it hasn't been before because of this. So.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, and we were mentioning some other church traditions who have been proactive, already seen some dissent and controversy over this issue and others. The Church of Ireland, Shirley, you mentioned, and the Episcopal Church in America, I think, has seen some splits over issues like the ordination of women and same-sex marriage. Is that correct?
Well, and I think my reading in the newspaper is that recently the Episcopal Church is now allowing same-sex marriage. Certainly Ireland was the first country to have a national decision about that, which I always find interesting given that it's such a high percentage of Catholics. Right. It's all very interesting of how this plays out.
Well, I know you can't see the future, but
no.
Do you anticipate major splits within the Presbyterian Church USA over
I
this
think
issue?
that's a great worry. I mean, in the same way that segregation and integration, all of those issues, have split denominations and churches. And certainly we would be naive to think churches are not leaving the Presbyterian PCUSA Church over this decision. But I think for us locally, this whole issue of mutual forbearance and trying to come to some agreement, as in families, when we disagree, we somehow learn to continue to live together as family.
Did you use that term in your symposium? Because I would imagine
That is in our book of order.
it is, but I would imagine that many people in the pews had never heard that term.
No, and it's a term we've heard more in the last 2 months than probably in the last, number of years. But that is in the book of order. But suddenly over an issue like this is very much a term that we come back to, of trying to find our way as a church family.
Sure.
Not unlike a personal family.
And I think that certainly some folks have left the denomination congregations as well.
Yes, they have.
But I think the tide of public opinion on this issue is shifting so rapidly that I imagine it won't be as large a split, a loss of numbers as, for example, in the case of the ordination of women or other issues. But that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that congregations, churches, either on the larger level or at the local level, depending on church polity, I think one of the things that comes up when there are social issues that are controversial or theological issues that threaten splits is the search for and reaffirmation of where authority within the tradition comes from. Is it the hierarchical institution or polity that defines authority? Is there somebody or some group above the local church that's going to define actions? Is it, as many Protestants believe, the Bible? Okay, is that the ultimate source of authority? Baptist churches, in theory, are autonomous, so they're going to be making their own decisions apart from any national governing board or whatnot. But Davis, I think your part in this symposium, for example, was essentially to talk about the Bible and what the Bible has to say as an authority on this issue. Is that correct? And
that's right.
In a lot of the dissent over same-sex marriage, a lot of the opposition also uses the Bible as an authority to claim that same-sex marriage is not theologically appropriate. Could you talk a little bit about your work with the Bible on this issue? How is it authoritative? Does it even address the topic directly? And how do you go about looking to the Bible for guidance here if it's appropriate?
Well, the Bible is certainly authoritative for the Presbyterian Church, and so the church in Blowing Rock asked for the week before I presented two persons to come and speak about the biblical case against same-sex marriages, and it certainly, the Bible is often thought of as a place where you find direct condemnation of homosexuality. And then my task the next week was to present the opposite. So the church tried to give equal weight to various sides on this issue. And in my own research, which my degree is in the Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, so I am intimately familiar with the Bible, and I've devoted my life to studying it. So I find it very fascinating and intriguing, and I'm consistently surprised and amazed at how the Bible speaks to issues of contemporary concern, but it doesn't do so immediately, and we need to read and engage the Bible, I think, responsibly, and also pay attention to how the Bible presents its own content to us, so that the Bible is often read in a kind of sloganistic way with a bumper sticker. The Bible says it, that settles it. I read it. I don't even know what it is, but that bumper sticker is a very unbiblical way of engaging biblical material. For example, from the beginning in the Torah with the laws and throughout the Bible, the ethical code that one finds there is never in the Bible simply replicated automatically by a community. It's always engaged, and some of the laws are revised or annulled, and new laws are created. So
you're reading of the Torah, the Old Testament.
Right.
Then you see an evolution of the ethics codes throughout. Yeah. It's simplistic to say, here are the 10 Commandments, this is the code all the way through the Old Testament tradition.
Right, and I don't know if I would say evolution, but certainly it's dynamic. The law is dynamic throughout the Bible, both the Old Testament, Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament. You find people of faith struggling with which laws from our past will we hold on to, and which ones will we revise, and which will we annul. And
all right, so when somebody at your symposium, all right, comes to you as the expert, and they say, look, all that's fine, but I want to know what the Bible says about same-sex marriage. Tell me, Davis, what does the Bible say anything about this, and if so, what?
the short answer is no.
Okay.
And
that would be a surprise to most people, I would think.
I think so. I think a historical understanding of sexuality is not on a lot of people's radar. That is, that sexuality is not ubiquitous. And in the ancient world, and in the Bible, and really throughout the ancient Near East, you find very little, if anything, that any sort of systematic way of speaking about sexuality the way we do. And most historians, I think, agree that the whole concept of sexual orientation is a historical emergence in the 19th century or so, and that what you do find in the Bible are descriptions of sexual acts, but never do you find someone talked about as a gay man or a heterosexual woman or something like that. Yeah.
And did you find people at the symposium engaged by this sort of discussion of the Bible, Shirley? Were they taken aback or surprised in any way?
Well, I think the entire effort, Ozzie, was to allow both sides to be heard. I mean, we are a congregation which has differing views, so that the real effort was to have voices heard and then to figure out how we proceed forward. So some people may have changed their mind, some did not, and now we must figure out a forward motion.
Right. Did in the context of these discussions, did First Amendment issues come up at all, or was that completely outside the parameters of the theological and ethical and moral discussions that were going on?
Seemed more outside of it to me.
Right.
I don't know how you would see it.
Yeah, I think so. But there was, going back to something you brought up earlier, concern about, in talking about different polities and top-down polities of certain church institutions versus the Presbyterian institution, which is much, and there's a historical relationship between the United States own polity and the representative sort of democracy. There was concern about not so much separation of church and state, but separation of the institution of the Presbyterian Church from the local congregations, and concern was, are we being forced to do something by a larger, and the short answer is no. But.
Yeah, one of the concerns that I've heard voiced, for example, is, let's say, if a session, I think it's a proper term, of the Presbyterian Church decided that they would not follow the recommendations of the national church or the sanctioning of same-sex marriages, would then that session be in danger of losing its tax-exempt status in any way? And I think that's one of the types. So far, this hasn't come up in a real way, but this is a sort of kind of overlap into First Amendment freedom of religious exercise issues that some people say might come about as a kind of domino effect or trickle-down effect.
Well, in the way the church is structured in the session, it elects new members to the session every year, and certain members rotate off. So that if a session decided that we are not going to sanction or allow on these premises same-sex marriage, that really can only stand for 1 year before a session takes on new members, some members rotate off, and then the decision could be revisited and could change. And it's my understanding that this does not get a session into any kind of legal, hot water.
Yeah, and I guess it's too early really to see where.
And maybe it is.
Yeah.
It's too early.
Yeah.
But it is, I think, a fascinating question, and one that we'll see about the loss of tax-exempt status because of discrimination. And we do permit some discriminations from tax-exempt, like colleges and universities, which may be, male, men or women only. But but with other things, we don't, and we'll just have to see where the chips fall with this one.
Well, I think just getting back to the process that you all have instituted here, it seems to me, again, that this could be a healthy template or model that other institutions could use. Mainly because it allows for education, it allows for expression at the grassroots level, it allows for change. Obviously, you know, we haven't heard the last word on this, so you know, I would encourage you to continue this sort of conversation at the local level and beyond, and maybe some outreach. And I would guess that you would see that this is...
And I think it has been good in that we've had to sit at a table together and we've had to listen to each other, rather than just assuming out here in the great, you know, halls of whatever, there is disagreement. And that is a good thing, when you sit together and exchange your feelings. I just think that's always good.
And practice mutual forbearance.
And
Is that the
yes,
phrase? Okay.
Yes, mutual forbearance.
Yeah. Well,
You know, not just that you have to like my way or I have to accept you, but that mutually we exchange, you know, understanding each other as best we can.
well, it's fascinating, and I applaud your efforts. And as we go forward from here, both in the churches and the larger religious environment, and in our society and culture, I think the work you're doing here is exceptional and could be expanded beyond the local church,
We hope
beyond the
so.
Presbyterian Church.
We hope so.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's Religion and Life for this week. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, you may contact us at watchapptv.com. Until next time, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt.